Hello and welcome back to the session on the Red-Headed League. I'm going to talk a little bit about John Clay because he is exciting as a physical figure as well as a criminal mastermind. Physically, he's interesting because he has, a very small stature, and if you read the story closely you will notice that his hands are also very fragile, almost feminine in appearance. So there's something significant about his physical appearance. Of course, we are also told that he is very stout and agile, and that has associations with the primitive and kind of animalistic aspects of this criminal figures. And we are also reminded of figures such as Edward Hyde from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So physically, this criminal mastermind, John Clay, is very interesting, and his name is also exciting because the name Clay also tells us that he is symbolically associated with the baser natures of human species. So but then the narrator also tells us that he has noble blood in him, and then he had been to Eton and Oxford, these elite higher institutions of learning. So on the whole, we do get a sense that he is an extremely complex figure, and we need to kind of unpack this physical and criminal aspects of this mastermind in the Red-Headed League. And now we need to remember that John Watson Holmes, the bank's director, Mr. Merriweather, and members of the police are waiting in the cellars of this bank, and at this stage Watson has something to say about the tension that is almost physically visible to the people who are waiting in this place. Watson says that my limbs were weary and stiff, for I feared to change my position, yet my nerves were worked up to the highest pitch of tension, and my hearing was acute, so acute that I could not only hear the gentle breathing of my companions, but I could distinguish the deeper, heavier in-breath of the bulky Jones from the thin, sighing note of the bank director. So it's a very atmospheric scene. If you could imagine a dark place underneath the bank where the gold of the bank is stored in big crates, and we have these men hiding, waiting for John Clay, who is passing off as Vincent Spaulding, an assistant of Jabez Wilson, and his accomplice to come through and catch them in the act of robbing the bank. So Watson's description of the situation is exciting because it gives us the tension, it kind of gives us the mood of the scene in a very, very vivid manner, and that is done through the capacity of Watson in distinguishing the different kinds of breathing. If you look at the gentle breathing of his companions, he is able to distinguish the heavier breathing of the bulky Jones from the police force, and the sighing note of the bank director, Mr. Merriweather. And such descriptions, I would suggest, are the traces of sensation fiction, the fiction of horror, the Gothic fiction, which is at pains to kind of depict the nervous tension of the participants in a scary, horrifying scene. So we do get elements of the Gothic, supernatural, and sensation fiction here in this set of description about the mood inside the underground of the bank. Now, the men do capture John Clay when he comes through the tunnel that he has dug with the help of his accomplice, and the police man Jones is very quick to catch him, even though his friend does escape back through the tunnel, but they have other policemen waiting to capture Duncan Ross, who also passes off as William Morris in this story. So his accomplice will also be caught at the other end of the tunnel, back in the cell of Jabez Wilson. So when John Clay is arrested by Jones, he says that, "I beg that you will not touch me with your filthy hands," remarked our prisoner as the handcuffs clattered upon his wrists. "You may not be aware that I have royal blood in my veins. Have the goodness also, when you address me, always to say sir and please." So this is the dominant identity that John Clay, who is also known as Vincent Spaulding in the story, wants to project to the audience. The royal blood. But this identity is contrasted in the story, as I pointed out earlier, with the baser instincts that he embodies, and which is signified in his surname Clay. So we are unable to square, we the readers are unable to square these varying strands of identities that are woven in the character of John Clay. So he has gone to institutions such as Eton and Oxford, which are institutions which accommodate elite students primarily, and at the same time he has very base qualities such as murdering, forgery, and other evil minded ways, which associates him with the primitive, the base qualities in human species, and which is also, as I said, pointed out by his surname. So he is very supercilious when Jones arrests him, and he says that, "Do not touch me, do not dare to touch me," and he says that, "Have the goodness also to address me as sir and please." So he wants that identity to be acknowledged, even though he is a criminal and that he has been caught robbing the bank. And this reminds me of Artful Dodger in Dickens's Oliver Twist. And when Artful Dodger, who is a petty thief in the group of Fagin, when he is arrested, he also puts up a similar show of pomposity and superciliousness, and he is very condescending towards the people who try him at court, towards the lawyer and the rest of the crowd who is watching him. So there is a kind of a parallel in this scene with Dickens's work, and we also realize that this is also a type in criminal characterization, where criminals, once they are arrested, also play upon or pretend to be members of the gentility and nobility in order to seek some kind of immunity from the law. Now, I want to focus on the dual nature in Sherlock Holmes. We have seen this hybrid quality in John Clay, slash Vincent Spaulding, and I want to focus a little bit on the dual nature that Watson spots in his friend. In his singular means unique. In his singular character, the dual nature alternately asserted itself, and his extreme exactness and astuteness represented, as I have often thought, the reaction against the poetic and contemplative mood which occasionally predominated in him. In other words, we have two distinct qualities in Holmes. One is the poetic and the contemplative mood, and we have the extreme exactness and acuteness, which is against this concept of the poetic and the reflective mood. So these two different qualities are jostling cheek by jowl inside the framework, the spiritual framework of Sherlock Holmes. And in fact, Watson assumes that this exactness and astuteness are a reaction to the poetic and the contemplative mood of Dickens. So these two moods are at war with one another, and this is very interesting because there is a duality in a human species, which we can see in the representation of John Clay, and we can also see somewhat in Jabez Wilson, who is a working class figure who's trying to pass off as a gentleman, who's also very pompous and supercilious. And so we have the duality in human nature represented in several characters in the Red-Headed League, from John Clay through Jabez Wilson to Sherlock Holmes, the great detective himself. This perspective that Watson has in the story for us is significant because it is trying to differentiate the mind of Holmes from the rest of humanity, and in that humanity Watson is also present, and he is almost the representative of the readers. And Watson says that I trust that I am not more dunce than my neighbors, but I was always oppressed with a sense of my own stupidity in my dealings with Sherlock Holmes. Here I had heard what he had heard, I had seen what he had seen, and yet from his words it was evident that he saw clearly not only what had happened, but was about to happen, while to me the whole business was still confused and grotesque. So at one level he is clearly suggesting that he is stupid and that Holmes is awesome and magnificent because he is able to work things out, whereas he is not able to. On another level, we are also told that that this is the status of many of the readers who are following the story, because they are also clueless as to what has happened in the past and what is going to happen in the future. So for readers and for Watson, what has happened is a confused and grotesque set of events, whereas the brilliant detective is able to order this confusion, make sense of this confusion, and lay out a neat plot which he trots over and takes the readers with him and explains the grotesque set of incidents and scenes that were shown to us, and he is able to explain everything away in a logical manner at the end of the story. So what is exciting about Holmes is also established, which is that he is able to understand very clearly the mysterious past, and he is able to predict what is going to happen. And that is what happens in the case of the Red-Headed League. As soon as he hears about the story of the advertisement which is attracting or taking Jabez Wilson away from his pawnbroking business into an office where he is made to sit for a couple of hours together without leaving the building, Holmes is able to understand that there are events at play which wants Wilson away from his place, and he figures out that it is something to do with money and not any other vulgar business, meaning there is no sexual plot involved, whereas there is a money plot that is involved, and that money plot would mean that the figures, the accomplices, the criminals who are inside Jabez Wilson's pawnbroking business are going to rob a bank. So he's able to understand the past clearly, and when he visits the pawnbroking business, he is able to understand through his travels to the street which is abutting on Jabez Wilson's pawnbroking business. He's able to figure out that there is a tunnel that is being dug from Wilson's pawnbroking business to the city bank which is in the neighborhood. So this ability to predict the future is what is exciting about the Red-Headed League narrative, because we know that something untoward is happening, and that Vincent Spaulding is somehow criminally associated, because we can read from the reactions of Holmes that he kind of guesses at the nature of this very expert, smart assistant of Jabez Wilson. So all these clues tell us that something untoward is going to happen, but what is the real mystery is that Sherlock Holmes is making arrangements to capture the criminals when they are about to proceed with their criminal activity. Now, the break-in is very interesting. The break-in into the bank is very interesting because of the physical attributes of John Clay, and look at the manner in which John Clay makes an appearance into the cellar of the bank. And I'm going to read that description because it's very exciting, because it also once again brings out the atmospheric nature of that crime scene. At first it was but a lurid spark upon the stone pavement, then it lengthened out until it became a yellow line, and then without any warning or sound a gash seemed to open and a hand appeared, a white, almost womanly hand, which felt about in the center of the little area of light. For a minute or more the hand with its writhing fingers protruded out of the floor, then it was withdrawn as suddenly as it appeared, and all was dark again, save the single lurid spark which marked a chink between the stones. So you can imagine the scene there. It's very dark. Everybody is in darkness. Nobody is lighting a light, and Holmes and his companions are waiting in the darkness, and suddenly there is a lurid spark, a garish spark of light upon the stone pavement, and and that stone is removed, and there is a hand, and look at the way it is described. A gash seemed to open. Gash would mean an injury, a wound, and it seems as if the opening is like a wound which is coming to the surface. A gash seemed to open and a hand appeared, and that's the hand of John Clay, a white, almost womanly hand. And it's very exciting, this description, this feminine attribute, or is it the attribute of the upper classes who have very soft, gentle, womanly hands because they're not used to manual labor. You can compare this hand with that of Jabez Wilson's hand, which is a rough, big hand because he has been a ship's carpenter, and he has also done a lot of writing as a different kind of physical labor. So a hand appears from underneath, and again the Gothic supernatural aspect of the scene is very clear. It's as if a body has come, a dead body is kind of coming to the surface, a hand that is appearing from underneath, and it's kind of feeling about around the floor, and for a minute or more the hand with its writhing fingers protruded out of the floor. So this scene with this protruding hand and writhing fingers kind of establishes the Gothic supernatural mood, and that's what I wanted to highlight in this particular scene. And suddenly the fingers are the hand is withdrawn and everything is dark again, and then once again John Clay opens that wound, so to speak, and he comes out through the cellar through that opening, and he's caught by the police. So at moments in the story we do get all these Gothic, sensational, supernatural elements in this detective fiction. So Holmes is harnessing the narrative of horror that has come before him, and he is coming at the tail end of a big tradition which is about all these unnatural events and activities and people. Thank you for watching. I'll continue in the next session.